This new young boy in Gates really slap.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. Today we're going to be looking at the Memphis Grizzlies in their season preview, and to talk about the Grizzlies I'm joined by the host, of course, of the Locked On Grizzlies podcast, and that is Peter Edmiston. Peter, welcome back to the show.
Josh, how are you, bud?
I'm good. It's good to have you back on the show to talk about this Grizzlies team. They're a team with quite a few question marks, I believe, with some positions, some rotation battles, some new faces that could provide some interesting numbers for this season. So we're going to talk all about that today. But we'll start by looking at the projected record for this team. Vegas has the over/under at 33.5. You've gone over that at 37. This is a team that, of course, was hit pretty significantly with injuries last season. They return Mike Conley to that mix. Add in the number 4 overall draft pick. Is that your hope, I guess, is that Conley is back and fully functional and ready to push this team? You're maybe looking for a playoff spot.
I think the Western Conference, Josh, is so tough, and I'm sure you've talked about it, a lot over the last few weeks. Once you get past the Warriors and the Rockets and the Jazz, and I think those are kind of the sure things. From about probably 4 through 11, 12, even 13 is going to be pretty tight. I think it'll be a little bit like last year where you saw the Rockets and the Warriors clearly better, and then from 3 through 8, it was barely a game or two difference in all those teams. I think it'll be very similar. For the Grizzlies to really have a chance in a competitive West, they're going to have a healthy Mike Conley. I mean, that's the number one thing, the far and away the most important aspect of any Grizzlies season prep. If you start thinking about a healthy Mike Conley for, let's say 70, 75 games, that's a team that is going to be a much, much better group. I'm not quite ready to say, Josh, they're going to be a playoff team, but I think they certainly will be competitive in that Western Conference. Will give a lot of teams a lot of trouble. Now, if you take Mike Conley out for 20, 25 games or more, then it's a whole different group. And I struggle to see without him where they're going to be able to find much offense.
Yeah, look, he is key. Look, he's going to turn 31 soon, so he's not exactly young. But last season was a weird one for Conley. We'll use that to transition on to talking about him. You've got him as the team's projected leading scorer. He is a guy that I think a lot of people have forgotten about just how good he can be. I was able to get him in the 60s of a draft I did the other day. He is ranked 36 on Yahoo, but people have this real concern about his injury. Peter, can you give us some sort of insight into exactly what the injury was, because the diagnosis seemed to shift quite a bit during the season, and where Conley is with that injury at the moment, and how much of a chance there is of it being a chronic problem?
Yeah, I think those are all good questions. In terms of the injury, he's had a few different foot injuries over the course of his career. This most recent one was it was a sore Achilles, but it was really more of a heel injury that manifested itself as a sore Achilles. And there's no, at least it doesn't appear that there was any structural damage to the actual Achilles itself. Which is good news. And so, he had a little bit of surgery to clean some things up there. And really the biggest issue was just rest and getting himself back into, getting his foot kind of back on track. He probably could have pushed it at times last year. I mean, if the Grizzlies had been much, much better, there is, I think, much more of a chance that he would have played. But given the nature of the season last year, it was no point in even trying. Much better for him to get the rest. The guy has played banged up throughout most of his career. I'm sure you've followed it very closely, Josh, and I'm sure the listeners who have followed Mike Conley's career closely will know. It's just every season it's something with him, and it's usually 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 little somethings that end up adding up. He's undersized. He plays a position where he gets a lot of contact. He drives the basket. He's pretty fearless. So he's going to absorb a lot of contact. And he's just not – he's never been able to really play 80, 81, 82 games. That's just not him. So if I'm projecting forward, I mean, that's kind of why I said the first answer, 70 games. I don't think it's really responsible as a fantasy owner, or indeed as someone who's just projecting for the season. It's just not responsible to really project any more than that. And that's probably a pretty optimistic look. Everything I've heard, I've spoken with Mike a few times. I've certainly talked to people around him. Everything appears to be on track, but until you actually see him in training camp, until you actually see him in the preseason, until you actually see him actually go through and do the things that you expect him to do, there's going to be skepticism, and it's going to be understandable skepticism. I'm as skeptical as anybody. If you were a Grizzly fan, you remember the Chandler Parsons signing 2 summers ago, where everything was on track. I mean, I remember talking to Chandler in July and that signing. Oh yeah, everything's great. September, everything's great. Oh yeah, and then it just kept being great until it wasn't, and it never was. So, those are the memories that are kind of in the back of your head when you think about this team, and when you think about kind of chronic injuries. You hope that Mike Conley, when he comes back, that he's able to put it behind him. If he is, I think he's going to have a spectacular season, because the offense is going to be geared largely around getting him opportunities.
The games played thing, he played 12 last season. The previous 3 seasons he played 69, 56 and 70. So hardly a bastion of health. And I guess part of the reason for him sliding is that. But also last year when he played, he struggled. He couldn't hit shots, 38% from the field and just 31% from 3. His assist numbers tumbled. His steal rate dropped. He was a guy that 4 or 5 years ago was getting 2 steals per game. He was only at 1 steal per game in 31 minutes. Of course, this is very, very, very limited in terms of sample size. He only played 370 minutes last season, but still, all those numbers, he was already a pain in the ass to own early in the season, but some of that has to be attributed to the fact that he was dealing with all this soreness, and I think that if he is back and if he is healthy, he's going to have a chance to put up top 30 numbers on a per game basis. It's all going to come down to your appetite for risk and how much you think he's going to play in terms of games, but I do agree that he will be the leading scorer on this team. And he will take that if he is healthy, he'll be able to take them a little bit higher than that overall over-under that we see there from Vegas. We've given the injury.
Let me jump in for a second, Josh, just to help you with it, because last year I would take very little from those numbers. If you go actually to the game, if you go to the actual game log from last year, the first game the Grizzlies played, Pelicans, I believe it was the opener. He was 9 of 15 from the field.
Correct.
He had a really good outing and looked great. And for whatever reason, after that game, that's when his soreness, the Achilles, whatever, came back, and from the other 11 games were when he really struggled. He was never even close to healthy. So I would take those numbers and basically throw them out. He tried to play through in the beginning of the season in a really painful situation. He said he just never even felt remotely healthy after that first game. So I would say that sample, not only is it small, but it's really, if he's healthy, he will look nothing like that. He'll look much more like the 2017 Mike Conley. If you look at that playoff series against the San Antonio Spurs, he averaged like 25, 7, and 7 or something crazy. He had almost a triple-double in Game 4, 35, 9, and 8 in that game. I don't know if he's going to put up anything quite that prolific over the course of a season, but he'll be closer to that than he was to last year's Mike Conley.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And even in those 12 games he played last season, he scored 20 points in 6 of them. So he still was able to put up pretty decent numbers at times, but of course it was waxing and waning. The efficiency did drop off at times, and I'm not worried about that. I am looking more at that 16-17 season in terms of production versus 17-18 for Mike Conley. We've spoken about his injury and his recovery. You've mentioned Chandler Parsons, so I've got to do the obligatory Chandler Parsons injury update. Are we ever going to see him play? Like, what are we ever going to get out of this guy? He played a little bit last year, had to be shut down again at the end of the season. Are we just in the point where, A, when he's never going to be healthy, and B, he might not even be part of the rotation this season?
I think he'll be part of the rotation, Josh, but I just don't think you can chalk him up for anything remotely close to health. I think probably the optimistic look, last year, when he played, he was significantly better, but that's not saying much, because his first year with the Grizzlies was just a total injury plagued nightmare. His numbers were disgusting. It was just a terrible first season. Last year, the numbers improved in terms of percentages, and he looked more efficient. He had a decent few games, but I think part of it was that he was held out a little bit because of the tank last year. And also he again was not healthy, and the Grizzlies are really cautious with him because those knees they can't really take back-to-backs. They can't take a lot of action. It seems like he has swelling and some kind of a reaction, when he plays a significant amount of time. It's been a problem for him for a while now. So to be quite honest with you, if you get 1,000 minutes out of Chandler Parsons, I think that's probably a bonus at this stage. I do think he'll play because the way the rotation is going to set up, they are going to use him as a 4 primarily. I would think he played very little in the 3 position, and he'll play a lot of that stretch 4 when he plays. And they've got lineups that will take advantage of length and playmaking and shooting. And I think you'll see Kyle Anderson as kind of the fulcrum of those lineups, not to jump ahead too much, but I think he'll kind of be the playmaker, and they'll put 4 shooters around him. And one of those shooters could well be Chandler Parsons. You could have a team full of 6'11 guys, 6'10 guys that have length, that can shoot it, that can make some plays. I think that's kind of going to be the way that they're going to have to roll with it this year.
Yeah, look, he's, I think, going to play exclusively at the 4. I think also the part of the problem is that Jaren Jackson and JaMychal Green are going to be logging heavy minutes at that position as well as Kyle Anderson does have the ability to push up to the 4. So I think that's going to limit him, which is good because he's not going to be able to play big minutes anyway. And I think we need to just write off any hope of him ever returning to any sort of large minute role at any point in his career. The other injury, Peter, in the Grizzlies at the moment is Javon Kata, who suffered a thumb injury. It looks at this point that he may miss maybe some time to begin the season, but with the signing of Shelvin Mack, he was demoted to 3rd-string point guard and probably wouldn't be an every-night guy to begin the season at least.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, I don't know that I would make the assumption that the Shelvin Mack signing would have pushed him back.
Okay.
I think the Grizzlies view Mack as more of an insurance policy / good locker room guy. He worked in Orlando with Chad Forcier, the new lead assistant coach for the Grizzlies. They like his basketball IQ. They like his locker room presence. They're really going big on locker room presence, Josh. That was part of the reason why they traded for Garrett Temple. They just had a pretty low basketball IQ group last year, and not a bad group in the locker room, just not really a stellar group in terms of character and hard work and all that stuff. Just was not really a great group. They recognize how gifted Jarran Jackson Jr. could be, and they want to surround him with high IQ, high character guys to really push his development along. And part of that's the reason why Shelvin Mack was there. As far as Javon Carter is concerned, historically this injury, the ligament tear in the thumb, has not been one that has kept guys out for huge lengths of time. It's usually a 6 to 8 week situation. He's already getting work in, and the fact that it's an upper extremity injury helps. He can keep his he's got really good cardio to begin with, so he can keep his cardio at a high level. He can be in decent shape when he goes into training camp. He'll come back, I would think, at some point late in the preseason, maybe early in the season, but it will affect his ability to kind of integrate with teammates. That is not timing wise not ideal, but I don't think it's going to be a major detraction. And I think they drafted him to play. They drafted him to play right away. He's a 4-year college player, a guy that has a strong defensive pedigree, 2-time National Defensive Player of the Year in college, Big 12 Player of the Year on multiple occasions, 4-time All Big 12 All Defensive Team. I mean, he's everything you can do defensively in college, the guy pretty much did. So to me, they drafted him and they want to play him, and I think they will. And Shelvin Mack is not going to keep him out of the lineup if he's healthy.
That's interesting. I thought that look, his shooting was an issue in summer league and in college. He's not the greatest of shooters. He's really, really strong defensively, as you mentioned, and that's obviously fits in with the ethos of this team being aggressive at the ball defensively, and I think he can be that guy. It's going to be interesting to see how they do work that with Mack and also Andrew Harrison, who played quite a bit at point guard last season. They did have another guy who played some minutes at point guard last season, but just before recording this, the Grizzlies announced that they have waived Kobe Simmons, who was on a 2-way deal. So you can, if for those of you watching the video, his name is up on the graphic because he just got waived before we did this. But they do have another guy on the two-way list at the moment, and that is Yuta Watanabe. who played with the Nets in Summer League. The Grizzlies used their two-way spots fairly liberally last season. Where do you think that Watanabe can fit in, or is he just a guy that, again, assuming we don't have terrible injury problems, that they're just sort of using to evaluate over the course of the season with the hustle?
Well, I think, again, Watanabe, fits some of the criteria that they're looking for. High character guy, hard worker, length, versatility. He was able to play a number of different positions and do a little playmaking at George Washington. He's got a nifty little left-handed shot off the dribble. He's able to drive in. At his size, they really look. It's not rocket science, Josh. And I know the league now is filled with a lot of interchangeable 6'7" to 6'10" guys that can play 2, 3, 4, and you'll be able to switch and hopefully play make a little bit, play off the dribble. Those things, if you have a number of those guys, it's kind of what the Warriors did years ago. They sort of cornered the market on getting those guys. And now the rest of the league, you look at teams like the Celtics, and that's you're just stockpiling that type of player. He's that type of player. He'll play the vast majority of his time in South Haven, Mississippi, just south of Memphis with the Memphis Hustle, the G League team. But I don't know how familiar you are with the geography of it, but that team is literally 10 minutes away from FedEx Forum where the Grizzlies play. That's their arena. Now their arena is unbelievable. It's an easy drive, and so the Hustle players actually use the Grizzlies facility to practice, to go through all their stuff. They don't do it at the same time the Grizzlies are there, but for two-way guys, it makes it extremely easy for them to maximize all 45 of those days with the main roster, because you can send guys up and down, in 15 minutes, as opposed to taking a plane flight from the Grizzlies used to have their G League affiliate in Iowa, in Des Moines. And so Des Moines, Iowa is about first of all, there's no direct flight. So you have to fly through multiple cities, and it's probably at least a 5 to 6 hour trip to get down there. So you really waste a day of service time trying to get a guy down to Memphis or wherever the Grizzlies happen to be playing. So much more efficient now with the Hustle. And you're seeing a big, big benefit in that regard with those guys. And Watanabe, I suspect, will spend a fair bit of time playing with the Grizzlies, mostly with the Hustle, as most two-way guys are. But they are pretty optimistic long-term about what he can bring. And, honestly, those two-way slots, as you see with Kobe Simmons, it's fairly expendable. If it doesn't work out, no big deal. You cut the guy. It's not a major financial investment. And if it does work out, as it has with certain guys in the past, then great. You convert them over and you go on about your business.
Watanabe was interesting in Summer League. Some really big defensive numbers, 1.6 blocks and 0.8 steals in only 24 minutes per game. So that's obviously appealing to us from a fantasy point of view, and almost 1.5 threes. So if he's able to translate that at some point, that's obviously really interesting. So he'll be a name to watch there in that two-way slot. As a breakout player, Peter, you've listed Marshon Brooks, and I'm really interested to hear about Marshon Brooks and how the Grizzlies are going to use him, because at the way things stand, if Mike Conley's back, we've got him there, we've got Javon Kata and Shelvin Mack at that point guard role. We had Andrew Harrison play at the 2 and play at the 1, and JB Bickerstaff really, really seemed to like what he brought defensively, and he took a massive step up. There's Dillon Brooks, who played a ton as a rookie and was one of the Grizzlies' best players last season. He can play at that position, and then they've also brought in Garrett Temple, and I haven't even mentioned Wayne Selden yet, who was perhaps the favourite to get that starting shooting guard job last season before that quad tendon injury kept him out basically all year. So there are a ton of guys to play in this position. I'm not really even mentioning the 3 because Kyle Anderson's going to be penciled in at that spot. So how does Marshon Brooks come into this area? He was excellent in the 7 games he played. Actually, on a per-game basis, he was the 18th ranked fantasy player, 20 points per game, 1.5 steals, 3.5 assists on absolutely insane percentages, 59% from 3. That's not going to continue, but in China, he was a 40% plus 3-point shooter, so he can be efficient. But where's he going to fit? Like, who is getting these roles at the 2? Is it Brooks? Is it the other Brooks? Is it Harrison? Is it Temple? Is it Selden? There are just so many names to fit into that one real position that seems to be open in this starting lineup.
Yeah, from a fantasy perspective, Josh, I have no idea how that's going to shake out, and I think it'd be very tough. I mean, first of all, in general, when have you ever won a fantasy league with a Grizzly shooting guard? I mean, that's like you never do that. That's a bad idea.
I reckon people won their leagues last year by picking up Marshon Brooks off the waiver wire and getting for those last 7 games. I reckon you won plenty of people leagues just for that insane.
You know what?
Stretch.
He might be the only one.
Yeah, probably.
That's true. He might be the only one. Historically, that's not been the greatest spot for efficiency other than steals. Tony Allen can get you some steals and all that. But in your traditional shooting guard numbers, you're not going to find him in Memphis. Brooks might be different. I don't know. And I think Brooks' role, the reason I have him as a breakout player is because, we just don't know in the NBA. Those 7 games were spectacular, but, I've talked to Grizzlies executives about this, and, they seem very confident that based on the fact that a lot of those games were against playoff hopefuls and teams playing, in their estimation, hard, that those are legit numbers. I don't know for sure, but I do know from a maturity standpoint, talking to Marshon Brooks, one of the things that you get the luxury of doing covering a team is kind of talking to guys and getting to know them a little bit. And Brooks, when he came into the league, just, as a first round pick back in 11, was not mature, was not ready. And, it takes some guys a little while to figure out how badly they want to play and how special it is to play in the NBA. To go to China and play and to be far away from his son, to be far away from his family. He played extremely well, but he mentioned how much he missed being around his family. It's a long way away. So to be able to get that second chance, and he grabbed it with both hands, the opportunity that he was given last year, I think he'll do the same this year. And I think he'll be used in kind of that, Troy Daniels type of role of just go in there and just shoot. I don't think he's going to have a tremendous amount of defensive responsibility. He's going to get the vast majority of his minutes against second unit guys, and he's going to have the greenest of green lights. Go in there and just shoot. And under those circumstances, I think he's a tremendous shooter and a really gifted scorer. The Grizzlies do not really have, other than Mike Conley, they don't really have a lot of guys who can go get their own shot, who can go get their own bucket, in a late shot clock situation or in a particularly tough defensive situation. Conley's got some capability of doing that, but they really don't have a whole lot of other guys. They got a lot of guys that are going to be catch and shoot and within the context of the offense, but Brooks can go get buckets. And I think that's going to be very valuable and increasingly valuable as the season goes on.
It's just going to be interesting to see how the minutes all break down. As I said, there's the 2 Brooks, there's Temple, there's Selden, and there's Harrison. Look, if he can push into 25 minutes per game and can keep up a decent level of efficiency, maybe you get 2 threes, 2.2 threes a game. Maybe you get 14 points in that bench role. But there are those other guys, and not one of them really stands out to me as the guy that's going to come in and demand this playing time. It could be a case where it's on a night-by-night basis, or it could be just completely split down the middle, or someone could stand out. But there is these guys here who it gives you an opportunity. Maybe you take a flyer on them with a last pick if you're just looking for maybe someone, and they go, well, here's 30 minutes and let's see what can happen. But just that's 5 names who legitimately could stake a claim to say, well, I played well enough last year to have a role on this team in this position. The Bickerstaff's going to have to work out exactly what he needs to do, and no one is really clearly separating themselves at this point from that position, and we'll see how that goes over the preseason. Peter,
yeah, I wouldn't listen, and I would say I don't think anybody, including the coaching staff, has an idea of how that's going to shake out. Yeah, there are, as you mentioned, all those guys. There's so many guys that are very similar. So many guys that have maybe, Garrett Temple is a much steadier guy, and he's very solid, which could be helpful depending on lineups. Wayne Selden, we really don't know because he hasn't been healthy and he's going to be pushed. Dillon Brooks, is he the best as a 2, or is he better used in a 3 role in a different situation? It remains to be seen. The Grizzlies they made a lot of hay out of Mike Conley at the 2 with Andrew Harrison playing the 1. And those lineups were very big back in 16, 17. And I don't think they want to go too far away from those as well. I think Conley could see a fair bit of time as the 2, even if he would be technically listed as a 1. So I really think, preseason and training camp are going to be vital to figure out what these lineups are actually going to look like.
I reckon the shooting guard position in Memphis is probably the most confusing position in the entire NBA, just in terms of the amount of guys who could stake a claim to get that position, that with 4 or 5 of them really putting their hand up for minutes there. So that is something that we do have to pay some attention to. Now, of course, Peter, JB Bickerstaff is here full-time now as the coach after his interim stint last season. It's always hard for a guy coming in as an assistant to the head guy during the season. But is there anything that we think of from Bickerstaff that he may be looking to implement differently to what Fizdale had installed through training camp last season, or will it just be a little bit more of the same? We've heard talk about them going back to more of a grit and grind mentality if Fizdale had sort of moved away marginally from that. Is that what we're looking at from a coaching style type of perspective from JB?
Yeah, it's hard to say because this is his first time to actually have a team of his own. It's the first time he's ever had like an actual training camp. He's been a head coach for more or less 2 full seasons, but under, difficult circumstances both times, with the situation with Kevin McHale and his health in Houston. And then, following up a guy that, David Fizdale, that, JB was in his wedding. I mean, a good friend who he had to take over when he was fired. So now he actually is for the first time getting his own team, his own stamp on things. And, so far what he has said is, he's going to double down on the defensive side. And I don't know that he's going to shy away from the 3-point shot. I don't think anyone can shy away from the 3 in this era. But I do think he's going to probably not emphasize it to the degree that David Fizdale did and that other guys have done. I don't know that's a good thing, but I think that's going to be kind of his thing where he's going to probably try to make up those points via driving to the basket, getting to the foul line, more aggressive techniques like that. He definitely wants the Grizzlies to be the knuckleball of the NBA, the way they were, back in their grit and grind best era, the best time over, between like 10-11 through 13-14, when they were the toughest team, maybe the toughest team in the regular season to prepare for because they were so different, so physical, such a defensive team that they beat great teams pretty regularly in that era because they were able to catch them off guard. You'll see some of that from JB Bickerstaff. The question is, can you win with that style now? The league, even in the last 4 or 5 years, has gone so dramatically towards the 3-point shot, towards more pace. You're seeing the rules changes implemented now with the shot clock resetting to 14 on offensive rebounds, meaning that, there'll be even more possessions in a game. And in those scenarios, unless you can, on a per possession basis, hold your own and knock down, that deficiency between your offense and your defense, then that's going to hurt the Grizzlies. And I don't think they can control the tempo the way they did in years past. So I'm intrigued, and I don't really know how far JB is going to go with this or how that's going to manifest itself. I don't think anybody does because I don't think you've really gotten a good feel for who JB Bickerstaff is as a true, real head coach. We're not really going to know until we start watching this year's Grizzlies.
The player you've got listed here as most likely to be traded for the Grizzlies is JaMychal Green. He had that restricted free agency, not really holdout, but I guess delay in signing a contract last season. He came in as the starter. I think it's fair to say he wasn't at his best, played 28 minutes per night. I don't really view him as much of a high upside guy. He's already 28 years of age, and the Grizzlies, of course, drafted Jarran Jackson Jr. We won't necessarily talk about the trade market of Green as much as where he's going to go or anything like that, but what can we look at for JaMychal this season? Do you think, A, he starts out the season as the starting power forward? And I guess tacking on to that, do you think he plays significantly fewer minutes than the 28 he saw last year?
I don't know. That's a tough one because, JaMychal Green, he's been a good, very solid player. Certainly has exceeded what you would have expected from him, as a guy who, came out late draftee, didn't have much going for him and, was in the Spurs organization for a while, came over to the Grizzlies and, they kind of nurtured him and they found a decent player. But I think he's likely to be traded, or at least the most likely of any Grizzly to be traded at this point because of his contract. A little under $8 million last year of his deal, at an age where he's going to he's certainly, I'm not going to say he's on the downside or anything like that, but I think whatever development you've seen, he was a late bloomer, an old rookie. So I think you've pretty much got what you got with JaMychal Green. Personally, I think they're going to start with Jaren Jackson. I just think they know what they've got. And unless Jackson really falls on his face in training camp, I think it's imperative that he get as much time as he can with those units. They may protect him for just a little short while, but I don't think it'll be very long at all before Jackson is the guy. And as you've talked about earlier, there's so many other guys that can play that position that I think are better than JaMychal Green, or at least better from a development standpoint, and then from the standpoint of what you want your team to be. I think JaMychal's a good, solid player, but does he give you consistent enough outside shooting? I don't really think so. He's undersized in terms of being able to be physical. He's not consistent with his offensive game apart from the ability to grab a few rebounds and do some dirty work and then hit some standstill threes. He's not really going to give you much more than that. Not really much of a playmaker. Pretty low basketball IQ on top of that. Good hands, can switch. That does help. But to me, there's not enough to really get him in a position where he's going to beat out those guys for those minutes. So I would expect his minutes to decrease unless he's traded. I think there are teams out there that could look at his skill set and be able to see him as a steady guy that can really help boost their depth. And his contract is easy enough to trade. So I think that's probably why you'd see the Grizzlies be interested in something like that. But I just don't foresee a big season at all for JaMychal Green.
He's like a worse Taj Gibson. He's a strong rebounder. He doesn't offer anything in steals and blocks for a big man, like really, really low numbers. The percentages aren't fantastic for him. Yeah, strong rebounder, limited offense. He just doesn't do enough. He was the 162nd ranked player last year in his 28 minutes. For some reason, he's got an average draft position of 134. That makes no sense. You shouldn't be going anywhere near him in 12 or 14 or probably even 16 team leagues with the arrival of Jarran Jackson. Peter, that is a good transition into Jarran Jackson, who the Grizzlies took at pick number 4 in the draft. I'm massive on Jackson. I thought he was the number 2 prospect in this draft. He came out, he lit things up in Summer League, especially that first game. His ability to hit the three was on show there, but it's his defensive stuff that's really impressive. One of the best defensive prospects to come out, and I've heard people say the best defensive prospect to come out since Anthony Davis. Blocking shots, being in position, with some offensive upside there as well, significant offensive upside. I think the Grizzlies have got a real star on their hands here. With Jarran Jackson, we don't expect him to be going out and playing 32 a night or anything like that straight away, but I think he's going to have enough value and play enough minutes this season to be a top 100 guy. Yahoo's got him ranked outside the top 120. I feel like he should be comfortably able to do that with a threes and blocks combination. How impressed were you, or were you surprised, I guess, more with what he was able to do in Summer League with that, offensive ability that he showed?
Well, I mean, again, I was really a big proponent of Jaren Jackson Jr., still am, and Luka Doncic was, the guy that I would have, probably had as number 1 on my draft board for the Grizzlies at 4. That didn't happen, but Jackson was like right there for me because of what you discussed. I mean, there's been no prospect in college basketball who has been able to shoot 35 or more % from 3, 75 or more % from the free throw line, and block 3 or more shots per game. It's never happened until Jaren Jackson. And that combination showed itself in Summer League. He showed an ability to hit the outside shot. He showed the ability to hit his free throws. He certainly was able to block a ton of shots. I don't know that he's going to be, quite that prolific his first year out. And I agree with you in terms of the minutes. I think they're going to be pretty cautious about overusing the guy, particularly because he's one of the younger rookies out there. He's not even 19. He won't turn 19 until next month. So he's very, very young. And they're very protective of him. And his dad is, basically was traveling with him in Vegas, and, is kind of, just making sure that he stays, along the straight and narrow. And, he's a young kid, man. He needs mentorship, but he's got a great attitude, great great talker, which is vital. I mean, I talked to Marc Gasol so much last year, and so many times Mark would say, we're not talking enough out there. Nobody's talking defensively. We're not communicating. There's too many my bads. There's too many guys, not getting the job done. And already at the age of 18, Josh, Jarran Jackson, if you watch him in Summer League, he's out there talking. He's talking to his teammates, guys that aren't going to be in the league, but he's telling them, okay, here's what's happening here. He's telling them what the coverages are on the pick and roll. He's letting them know who's behind them. He's letting them know where they need to go. He's guiding guys. If you watch one of the games in Summer League, he actually dissected the play call on a sideline out of bounds late in the game, told Deontay Davis where to go and pointed him in the right direction, broke up a play that ended up winning the Grizzlies a game. And this kid's 18. So those skills are vital. Coaches love that stuff. And I think he's going to find himself playing more and more because he's going to make mistakes, but he's got such great athleticism. He's got such great defensive instinct, and he's got the right attitude. That'll make up for all that stuff. So I think coaches, they don't always love to play rookies, but I think it's going to be hard to keep this guy off the court.
Yeah, and I'm always really cautious with looking at rookies and their fantasy production, but if you're getting him at pick 120, just the ability, if he plays 26 minutes a night, he could very easily block 2 shots per game, and that's value enough right there. You've already touched on the fact that he can shoot from the free throw line. That's a positive. Yeah, if he knocks into 3 per game, another addition there, get maybe a steal per game. And then I think there is something to say about an ability to improve the playmaking and stuff. I think he's a top 25 guy at some point in the next 4 to 5 seasons, can really take that step forward. I'm massive on him. He's the second rookie, I believe, for Dynasty Leagues. I think he's a guy that's maybe the 4th or 5th best just on a seasonal basis for this season, but a pretty comfortable top 100 guy.
And the thing is, Josh, when you talk about dynasty leagues, like here, so we had this discussion prior to the draft, but I really think if you project out guys' career, and let's just say hypothetically that we extend out 10 years and all of the top 10, 15 picks, whoever, go as far down as you want. Let's say everybody has the best possible version of their career. So they reach whatever their best potential is as a player. In that scenario, to me, Jarran Jackson's the best player of the bunch because the best version of Jarran Jackson is a 6'11". He's basically a Kevin Garnett light, probably not quite as prolific as Garnett, but he's got great hands, would be a huge shot blocker, would be a great 3-point shooter, would be able to drive the ball to the basket, would be a killer in transition, would do all those things that are like that are so important in today's NBA. I just think even if you take Doncic as good as he could be, all those guys, if you just say the absolute best, if everyone reaches their potential, to me, Jarran Jackson is the best rookie in the class.
Yeah, I can totally see that. If that offensive game and the ball handling stuff comes along, then he's really got that ability. And I think he's got a potential to be a multiple-time defensive player of the year type of a guy. Now, if we talk about defensive players of the year, Marc Gasol is in your projected starting 5, along with Mike Conley, Dillon Brooks, Kyle Anderson, and Jaren Jackson Jr. Let's talk about Gasol, who was pretty solid last year. He, of course, is 33 years old at the moment, was the 37th ranked player. He showed some signs of slipping, some of a defensive slip, I guess, but the numbers were still pretty impressive. Do you think that we see with Jackson around now that maybe Gasol plays maybe 1 fewer minute, 2 fewer minutes per game for this coming season?
That's possible. Again, it's going to depend on how they want to bring Jackson along and what they want to emphasize with him. If it's up to Mark, he won't. Mark wants to play all the time.
Oh yeah, he complained about it last season about he
was pissed off. He was pissed off about anytime he misses.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times they didn't even communicate especially well with him that he was, and they would occasionally leave it to the last second to tell him he wasn't going to play to avoid confrontation, stuff like that. This year I think will be a little bit different in that regard. So playing Jarran Jackson alongside of him will be interesting, but I think you'll see Mark's numbers increase. Again, I don't know that Mark is ever going to give you prolific individual defensive numbers. He certainly could theoretically give you some good offensive numbers if he's in the mood to do so. But his value to the team is going to rise because he's going to be surrounded by smarter players. And Mark, he's worked on it, and he was better last year after the whole Fizdale nonsense and that craziness that happened. He was much more patient than he had been in years past, but he still doesn't suffer fools gladly. You know what I mean? Like he's not really a guy that takes a lot of BS and a lot of guys learning on the job. Yeah, that's not really his thing. He wants you to know what you're doing. He wants you to be able to be where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. And this team should be much more capable of that, which in turn I think will make him much more productive. I don't know as a fantasy player if that means he's all of a sudden going to be, much higher up all of those numerical charts that he needs to be productive for you from a fantasy standpoint. But I think from an effectiveness standpoint, he's going to be a better player.
I think he's bang on just exactly where he was last year in terms of overall value, that third round reliable center who probably projects better in a rotisserie guy versus head to head with an ability to contribute in points, threes, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, and be a good free throw shooter. Even though the field goal efficiency did drop from him last year, still contributing right across the board. But you did mention, Peter, higher IQ players, and that brings me to the starting small forward for this team, Kyle Anderson, who the Grizzlies signed away from the San Antonio Spurs. I think Anderson is one of the biggest potential fantasy steals for this upcoming season. He is going to slot into that starting small forward job. He essentially replaced Kawhi Leonard last season, but still only saw 26 minutes per game in where he was a top 90 fantasy guy. I think that he will smash through that 27 minutes per game with Memphis, and with his ability to block shots, get steals, rebound, assist, and if he can somehow get into a decent three-point shooter, he's ranked 112th on Yahoo. It makes absolutely zero sense. They're expecting him to be significantly worse than he was last year, which of course is probably not going to happen. I think he's got a chance to be a top 60, top 50-ish type of a guy. He is locked in at that position. He's going to, as you said earlier, handle the ball and run a lot of things through him. I expect pretty big things from Kyle Anderson, who a lot of people don't realize just how good this guy is.
Yeah, I've been a big fan of his for since he was coming into the league, and I wanted the Grizzlies to draft him the year that he ended up going to the Spurs. They're really high on him, and he was their guy basically going into free agency. They really strategically they knew that a lot of teams would have cap space this coming off season, so they felt like the best use of their mid-level exception this year would be to try to go for a multi-year contract, knowing that they probably weren't going to be able to use much space in the coming years, at least certainly this year and probably next year as well. So they felt like they should lock someone up, and someone young. And Anderson's 24, a guy that has not really been able to consistently play until last year, and as you pointed out, was really very productive in the minutes that he got. And it has his role kind of went up in a injury-plagued, weird year for the Spurs. You saw more and more of what he can do and the different things that he can do on a basketball court. And if you think of him, to me, it's more effective if you think of him as the point guard for the Grizzlies. I mean, he will play a great deal of point. And so if you think of him as the point and Mike Conley as the two, Dillon Brooks or Wayne Selden or whoever it ends up being, Garrett Temple as the three, quote unquote, and then you have Jarran Jackson, Marc Gasol, all of a sudden you have Kyle Anderson, you have four shooters, you have ball movement, you have player movement. And Anderson in that system, I think, is going to blossom because you're not going to really need him to be a standstill shooter. He can shoot okay from time to time, but that's certainly not where he's going to give you his value. But as a guy who can work in transition, a guy who's a really crafty finisher around the basket in that bizarre, slow method of lulling guys to sleep and somehow using those long arms to get that ball into the basket, opening up space, opening up opportunities for other guys. I think that's going to really suit him. And then, as you mentioned, defensively, he's got tremendous value. I mean, he has a great knack for using his length beautifully. Great stealer, and a really crafty stealer. He can pick your pocket from behind. He can, totally different angles sometimes than guys are used to seeing defensively. Same thing with the shot blocking. He can come at you from a totally different angle, and it can really surprise you. I don't know. To me, I just think he's And the other thing is they really have a lot of confidence in him. They went out and got him, and they got him for a reason. This wasn't like a fallback option. They really envisioned getting him and using him. And so when you have a team and a coaching staff that is in that frame of mind, then yeah, he's going to play more minutes. And I think he has a great opportunity, as you say, to be a steal for a lot of people out there. If you get him, relatively late, he's going to be a guy that's going to be out there, and he's going to rack up numbers. He's going to rack up some unconventional numbers for his position. So, if I were out there trying to kind of work on the edges of my team, I think Kyle Anderson would be a very smart pickup.
Dillon Brooks is the other guy you've got here, projected as starting shooting guard. We've talked about already that the mess that is that position. Brooks played 29 minutes per game last season, but still finished outside the top 200. But over the second half, or the last maybe 6 weeks of last season, he took on a really elevated role and started to put together some really, really strong performances. But still, he has to deal with inefficiency concerns, not the greatest free throw shooter, doesn't generate big defensive numbers, not a strong rebounder. And I fear that those big scoring outbursts that we were seeing from Brooks, where he had 28, 22, and 36 points in his last 6 games, and a couple of other 20-point performances through March, that he's just not going to get that level of usage with Conley back, with Gasol playing, with Jackson around, with Anderson. He's just not going to get exactly the same level of role, and I don't think that he is worth looking at as one of those late picks. Despite, even if he does start and play 30 minutes, I just don't think that role we saw in March, April from Dillon Brooks is necessarily going to be something that continues on for the coming season.
Yeah, I don't think it's hard to say. With Dillon Brooks, unless he has improved pretty dramatically, I wouldn't be jumping out to grab him for my team. I think he's a really smart player, but he's very much a third, fourth option. I mean, I think at this point in the career, you would look and say he's got that whiff of Courtney Lee about him, where he's a solid player to have, can certainly be a good defender potentially, not going to take anything off the table, proverbially speaking, but kind of shot shy, just okay in terms of that stuff. And I do think that was a little bit of fool's gold late in the season. Buoyed by a 37-point performance in the final game of the season against Oklahoma City. I don't think that was reality. My jury's still out on him as a, from a fantasy option. I wouldn't be thrilled about him. I think as a teammate and as a complementary piece, I think he's very good, and I think he'll serve the Grizzlies well, and I think he'll have a good year. I definitely would not think that is going to apply to a good fantasy year, however.
Look, you could look at that game against Detroit. He had 22 points, 8 rebounds, 8 assists, and 2 steals, and went 11 of 14 from the line. You go, bang, that's great. But it just seemed, as you said, fool's goldish that he's not going to be playing in that sort of a role, and he's just not going to have that same sort of opportunity. So I'm not in on Dillon Brooks by any stretch. The last guy, Peter, I do want to talk to you about is Ivan Rabb, who, like Brooks, at the end of last season, started to look a lot better. Had in his last 5 games 16-7, 12-11, 8-4, 14-8, and 12-13, with a couple of multi-block performances in there. If Jermichael Green does end up getting moved, that might end up in more time for Rabb. He probably is, again, with Deontay Davis gone and Dakari Johnson unlikely to make the roster. He probably is the backup center unless we're going to put Jackson there, although he'll be starting at the 4. Did you have any change of opinion on Rabb, given the way that he did start to come on towards the end of last season after a disappointing start to the year where he barely saw the court?
No, I just don't. I don't see much, from him. I don't know what it is that he brings to the table with this group, and especially at a very crowded position. He's undersized. He's got a nose for the ball, so he's kind of one of those instinctive rebounders.
Yep.
But he's not very strong. So he kind of knows where he should be, but then he pretty easily gets bodied out of that position. So it's not really that useful of a skill. He has not really done anything in terms of shooting the ball to speak of, in terms of like an outside shot or something that would stretch the floor. So a guy that can't really do that and can't really physically hold his own, I don't know what can he do? How's he going to get on the floor? So that I don't see much from him unless he takes a big jump. And, he's young enough to where maybe he could. But at this stage, I don't see much.
I'm still holding out a little bit of hope for Rab, but yeah, again, the outside shot, it needs to develop, and it hasn't yet, and we don't know if it ever will. Peter, I think that will wrap it up for looking at this Grizzlies team. Some interesting guys there in that really, really weird, 5-person battle for the minutes at shooting guard. What's going on over on Locked On Grizzlies? What have you got happening at the moment?
Well, right now, we are getting set for the season, so it's a time of preparation as much as anything else. And we got a lot of fun stuff coming your way this year, and I'm excited about some of the opportunities. I've been doing a lot more writing, and covering the team more closely on a writing perspective, which has given me some different contacts, and I'm looking forward to using those for the year ahead. So, going to be good stuff, Josh, and I appreciate you having me on.
No problem, Peter. It's good to have you on. Go and check out Peter on Twitter. Go and follow him at the Locked On Grizzlies podcast as well. And subscribe to this one, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube. Give it a thumbs up, leave a comment. You know all the ways that you can help out. Peter, thank you once again.
Thanks, Josh.
Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.